Hi, my name is Carmen, and I am an early childhood special education teacher, a life and ADHD coach, and I'm the host of this podcast, Authentically ADHD. I created this podcast to help anyone wondering if they have ADHD, people who have been diagnosed for a while and want some more support and community. I'm here to bring you the latest research on ADHD and neurodiversities while we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of ADHD. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi there, and welcome back to the podcast. I am so happy that you pressed play on this episode because it's an important one. We're going to talk all things ADHD and women, our self image, and how emotional regulation impacts our self image. So, are you ready? Let's get started. So, first, let's talk about ADHD in women versus men or boys versus girls. The DSM 5 is not only written in the perspective for children, but it also favors the male symptoms of ADHD. Emotional dysregulation is not even really part of the criteria, even though the latest research shows how prevalent this symptom is. And in the times before, I think it was 1998 in my research, the other descriptions of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they did have something about emotions in their description of the developmental disorder. The DSM-5, the latest update did not include anything about it. So when a boy who shows the telltale signs of ADHD, being hyper, impulsive, having an inability to follow directions, versus when a girl is brought in for the symptoms that we tend to display, like emotional dysregulation, distraction, and mood swings, we are labeled with depression, anxiety, and as we get older, bipolar disorder, mood disorders, and sometimes even borderline personality disorder. Usually we are misdiagnosed, which in turn leads to being treated for the wrong mental illness. Let me tell you from experience, this is not fun, okay? Doctors tend to look at and treat the symptoms of the person instead of treating the whole person. And I don't just teach kids what they don't know, right? I teach the whole child. So I am of the belief that we should treat the person, child, human as the whole human instead of just looking at the symptoms. I believe that most of the women that were late diagnosed could possibly not have comorbid like anxiety and or depression if we were diagnosed at an earlier age and treated correctly. Why? Well, let's talk about women. We are generally better than most people, like women are generally better than men at masking our symptoms. We end up trying to hide or mask all of the quote unquote flaws that we can, trying to make them look neurotypical. But we can't mask them all, so we still go through rejection as we grow up. Research shows that kids with ADHD get rejected more than 2 times at the rate of typically developing peers. So we are rejected by our peers. We also receive more criticism, negative feedback, and correction from the adults and teachers and parents and coaches that we grow up around. And we often feel like we are the problem. So let's talk about the societal expectations of women. No one says this stuff out loud, but we as women are pretty much expected to be polite, sit nicely, smile, grow up, marry a man, have kids, and take on the household roles. Basically, keep the house flowing. A lot of people don't live like this anymore, like they don't. and they don't believe in this anymore, but these societal standards are still there. If you look at movies, TV, I mean, sure, there's new movies that have come out and things like that, but if you look at mainstream media, those societal standards are still there. They're taught through childhood, especially if you grew up through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So, in turn, women with ADHD, we end up trying to keep up with our neurotypical peers, and no matter what we do, we cannot seem to catch up to these unrealistic expectations. So, through life, you're rejected by peers, told negative feedback almost constantly by adults in childhood through to adulthood. So, of course, we take on what others say and make it a part of our identity, of our self image. We start to actually believe that we are lazy, stupid, dramatic, a mess, a failure, not living up to our potential, talkative, etc., etc., etc. What kind of self image do you think that would develop from these beliefs? Well, let's talk about what self image is. From the Oxford Dictionary, self image is the idea one has of one's abilities, appearance, and personality. So basically, it's how you think and feel about yourself. So if you have taken on mostly negative opinions that people have of you or have had around you and take them on as your own, that self image is going to be pretty negative. If you didn't catch on before, self image is pretty much the same thing as your self concept or identity. And if you've been here for any amount of time listening, you know that the way we think and feel about ourselves is very, very important. We cannot grow through shame. I also want to point out that the self image we have now created isn't even really ours. It's not actually what we think, it's a collection of other people's and society's opinions. So that's where we start, is improving that self image. But we have to start to build a positive self image by cultivating compassion and love for ourselves. And sometimes we have to get some new people. Surround yourself with people who think positively about you, people who will love you no matter what, people who will support you and lift you up and help you. This doesn't happen overnight, it all takes time. Usually, it takes the help of a therapist and sometimes even a coach to help work through some of this. So, you may be wondering, what does emotional regulation have to do with all this? Well, as the newer research is coming out, it's showing how much emotional regulation plays a role in ADHD. Slowly, we are figuring out that ADHD is a regulation disorder, not just an attention deficit disorder. In my words, ADHD is the regulation and management of the self, mostly the executive, the executive functions, one of which is emotional regulation. And when you add impulsivity to emotional regulation, sometimes that looks like hyperactivity. Now, boys have a hard time regulating too. It's why they can't sit still or focus and why they are impulsive. We have plenty of attention, the girls too. We lack the ability to regulate and focus that attention, whatever gender or presentation you identify with. I've talked about this before, but there are 3 different presentations of ADHD: hyperactive, inattentive, and combination type presentations. Plus, beyond that, we all fall along a spectrum, so we struggle with different executive functions at varying levels. To make this easier to understand, let's take a symptom like hyperactivity. All ADHDers struggle or have some type of hyperactivity, but the way it looks, the way that it presents, changes from person to person. For example, an attentive presentation may look like hair twirling, daydreaming, tapping, shaking legs. Combination presentation can look like anything from excessive talking to interrupting to not being able to sit still, tapping, twirling, those types of things. And hyperactive is inability to sit still, seems full of energy, driven by a motor, and is talks excessively. So, just like hyperactivity, emotional dysregulation presents differently in all people with ADHD. Women, again, are also good at hiding emotions or making them seem less intense than we're actually feeling them. ADHDers struggle with rejection sensitivity as well, mood swings, and we have a hard time recognizing, naming, identifying, and managing our emotions. We face these challenges daily, usually because we have a lack of self awareness and self evaluation. We have very low emotional literacy. Before learning more about emotions, I remember living in like a 3 to 4 different emotion type world: happy, sad, mad, and fine. I couldn't label things like grief, loss, joy, or other emotions that help us become more literate or descriptive of our emotions, in turn, helping us learn about our own emotions, the triggers that cause them, and help us gain control over the regulation of those emotions. You can do this on your own, but it is more beneficial when done in a therapy setting and or with a coach or community to help you. Check out, my Focused link if you want to join Focused, the ADHD group coaching program by Kristen Carter, none other than the host of the I Have ADHD podcast. If you use the link in my show notes, we both save money, so that's awesome. You can also contact me about coaching sessions, and I have a great book recommendation. If you want to learn more about emotional literacy, Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown really helped me expand my emotional literacy, and it helped me to understand why it's important to do this work. Understanding what emotion you're having and why you're having to feel said emotion, knowing what's causing the emotion, and usually what's causing our emotion is our thoughts about a situation, but it can be triggered as well by behaviors of others or situations. But to truly understand this process of feeling your emotions and validating them in order to change unhelpful emotions is one of the best skills that we can learn as ADHDers. Why, you ask? Well, think about it. Almost everything we do involves emotional regulation, right? Anytime we have to wait, learn something new, start a task, follow instructions, care for our children, and so on and so forth. I want to ask you, when are emotions not a thing? Because usually women with ADHD end up needing to learn to regulate our emotions pretty often throughout the day. Although there is more recognition of the emotional dysregulation that goes along with ADHD, the DSM 5 again does not reflect this. So sometimes even doctors don't tend to even have the latest research in order to help their patients live a higher quality life. Research has shown that emotional regulation is one of the key factors of ADHD. Whether it looks like uncontrollable temper tantrums, the inability to sit still, and or racing thoughts inside of our heads, emotional regulation is also one of the most misunderstood symptoms as well. This again comes from the misunderstanding of the impact in women of the menstrual cycle in women and how that plays a huge factor in our entire lives, especially in our emotional regulation. See, what happens is, like, we have a cycle, right? And the ADHD symptoms go on a roller coaster with the cycle. Now, what happens is that we grow up as ADHDers, diagnosed or not, unless we are specifically taught how to, like, unless we're specifically taught how different emotions feel, what they are called, and unless we're properly mirrored as a child, meaning our caregiver mirrors our feelings. Like, we're feeling disappointed, and so they feel disappointed with us, and they validate that how that we feel disappointed is valid. If we're not directly taught how to process emotions and taught what to do with them, we end up developing an understanding that emotions are either good or bad, and sometimes we're even encouraged to avoid emotions as a child due to the parents' lack of emotional literacy. So we mimic what we see in our families and on TV, in media, and in our other relationships. Personally, I had the learned behavior to throw my emotions at other people or push them way, way down. Like the further I pushed, like maybe the uncomfortable ick in my body would just go away. I'm going to let you in on a secret. Trying to stay numb and push my emotions down and avoid them did not work. It actually backfired right in my face and it made things 10 times worse for me and all the people around me. I was I was always told as a kid like I was too much, dramatic, needy, overreacting, all the things until I stopped. Then I was the quiet one, the one that was never paying attention and always off in her head. So, as we went through all the types, presentations, and why emotional dysregulation needs to be taken more seriously, let's talk about a little bit more about how it affects our self-image. If we grow up believing our emotions are either good or bad, we begin to believe we are bad for having any negative emotions. I'm going to read that again because I feel like it was kind of a great statement. If we grow up believing our emotions are either good or bad, we begin to believe we are bad for having any negative emotions. Through media, parents, and growing up in a neurotypical world, we see how we can be portrayed as, stupid, lazy, crazy, or weird. And we as humans are also under this weird assumption that once we reach a certain stage of life or get that job or do that thing or get that car, then we will finally be happy, like it's a destination or something. I've said this before and I'll repeat it until I'm blue in the face. Emotions are not destinations. Emotions are also not a problem. Emotions are actually just a part of life. Sometimes they feel awful and sometimes they feel great, but you'll never stay there. It's a part of the experience of life. Emotions are kind of a roller coaster a little bit, or maybe just a nice hilly drive. I don't, for me, it feels more like a roller coaster. I don't know. I can't talk for you. But in my opinion, since the research shows that emotional regulation is a key factor in ADHD and emotions, and since emotions drive our actions, treatment for ADHD should include improving emotional literacy as early as possible, building a child's ability to identify, process, validate, and shift emotions. The fact that I didn't learn how to do this until I was 30 years old sometimes makes me feel very regretful and shameful and terrible because, it's one of those grief things that we go through when we are, diagnosed late in life. What could I have been? And all those things. But building in emotional support, scaffolding, and also building our self images back up is key in adulthood. I mean, now, because it's on us now. So, the first step is emotional literacy, if that's where your needs are, understanding, identifying, and actually feeling your emotions. From most of the people I've met, this is kind of where they have to start because they weren't like self aware of what was going on. And from there, the more you build up strategies to regulate, you build resilience and the ability to be compassionate and kind to yourself, to feel the big emotions without throwing them at other people, avoiding them, and or masking them or numbing them. After we were able to do this is probably when you'll be able to actually believe that you get to create your own self-image. That's kind of where the emotional regulation and self-image kind of cross paths, is that you have to believe that you are in charge of what you think and feel about yourself. So, I mean, hey, if you think about yourself as a failure and you feel constant shame and that's working for you, by all means, keep doing that. I personally have never met anyone who, it's working for them, but if it's working for you, keep going with it. You probably still wouldn't be listening. Once you truly believe that you are in charge of your own self-image, you'll be able to begin to build your positive self-image, what you love about yourself, what you're grateful for, and why you think you were put here on this earth. feeling confident and grounded in your decisions. This is because as you're building that positive self-image, you'll also begin to build true self-trust, to truly believe that no matter what you do, no matter what you decide, that you will always be there to take care of yourself, no matter what. So I hope you were able to follow along in this episode. I did feel like I jumped around a lot, but this is because I am very passionate about emotional dysregulation, especially in women. It's one of the hardest things to manage, but it's so worth it when you do because it's involved in every part of our lives. And as always, if you feel you need more support, I have a few different ways that you can work with me. And you can also use that link in my show notes to join Focused. I hope you learned more about emotional regulation and why it's so important. And I hope that you can start building up a positive self-image. That's all for this week. Stay authentic, my friends, and we will talk soon. Speaking of extra supports, I just wanted to tell you all that I've updated my Patreon page to include all of the resources that I've really ever made to be held in one place. Just head to my show notes. The VIP members do get a little extra, but you can also purchase like my brand new ultimate ADHD journal and planner, which I've been using for the past year. That has worked. Nothing is priced over $10, and everything is at least 50 to 100 pages that you can download and print. You can get it binded and sent to you, or you can just read it off your screen and use notebook paper. So if you want or need any type of that kind of extra support, just head to my show notes and click the Patreon link to join. I hope to see you in there.